The transport pod shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Terran 7. David Brooks pressed his face against the small window, watching clouds rush past in streaks of white and gray. His stomach twisted with the descent, but he kept his eyes open. He needed to see everything, learn everything, remember everything. 20 pods fell from orbit that morning, each carrying a contestant from a different species across the galaxy. The Galactic Council had designed this competition to test survival skills without technology. No weapons, no tools, no devices, just beings and nature. The winners would earn their species a seat on the High Command, the most powerful governing body in known space. David had read the rules 100 times during the journey. Primitive planet, varied terrain, 1 week to prepare before the first challenge. Simple enough, except most species in the galaxy had never lived without technology. They evolved on worlds with crystal formations that gave them natural energy sources. They built cities before they built fires. They flew ships before they learned to swim. Humans were different. Earth had been harsh and unforgiving. Humanity climbed from caves using nothing but stubborn determination and clever hands. The pod hit ground with a thud that rattled David's teeth. The door hissed open and humid air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet earth and green growing things. He stepped out onto soft ground covered in moss and fallen leaves. Trees towered above him, their canopies blocking most of the sky. Somewhere in the distance, water rushed over rocks. David took a deep breath and smiled. This felt like home. Across the planet, other contestants were not smiling. Ral emerged from his pod near a coastline, his blue skin glistening in the sunlight. As an Aquarian, he felt most comfortable in water, but the ocean here was wild and cold. He had never seen water that was not carefully controlled and temperature regulated. The waves crashed against rocks with terrifying force. High in the mountains, Tesser spread her wings and caught the wind. Her people, the Sky Dancers, had built floating cities in their world's upper atmosphere. Everything was light and airy and carefully designed. Here the wind gusted unpredictably and sharp rocks jutted from every surface. She landed on a narrow ledge and immediately realized she had no idea what to do next. In a rocky valley, Gorth roared his challenge to the sky. The massive reptilian warrior had trained his entire life for combat, but always with weapons and armor forged in advanced factories. Now he wore only simple cloth and faced a world with nothing familiar. He punched a boulder in frustration, then winced as pain shot through his knuckles. Viewers across the galaxy watched on their screens as the contestants scattered and began their survival attempts. Betting pools opened immediately. Most bet on the larger, stronger species. Few paid attention to the human. David ignored the tiny camera drones that floated around him. He knew billions were watching, but that did not matter. What mattered was water, shelter, and fire in that order. He moved through the forest with purposeful steps, eyes scanning the ground. Within minutes, he found what he was looking for. A stream cutting through the landscape, clear water bubbling over smooth stones. He knelt and examined the rocks carefully. His fingers traced over different types until he found it. Flint, dark and glassy with sharp edges where pieces had broken away. He selected several pieces and tucked them into his pockets. Then he found a harder stone, something to strike against the flint. Other contestants were still standing near their pods, confused and uncertain. David walked along the stream looking for the right location. He needed flat ground, close to water but above the floodline with trees for materials and shelter from wind. He found a spot where 2 large rocks created a natural windbreak. Perfect. He gathered dry grass and tucked it under his arm. Dead branches from the forest floor came next, arranged by size. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, movements honed by years of teaching survival skills back on Earth. Every summer, he had taken students into the wilderness and shown them how their ancestors had lived. Now those lessons might earn humanity a seat among the stars. The shelter came first. David found a fallen log and propped branches against it at an angle, creating a slanted roof. He covered this frame with layers of leaves and moss, building up insulation. The structure would keep him dry and trap his body heat. It was not pretty, but it would work. As the sun began to set, other contestants were still struggling with basic needs. Tesser had tried to weave grass into a nest, but her hollow bones made the work exhausting. Ral had found a cave near the beach, but could not see in the darkness and kept stumbling over rocks. Gorth had tried to tear branches from living trees and only succeeded in tiring himself out. David arranged his fire materials carefully. He shredded the dry grass into a nest of tinder, so fine it was almost like hair. Next to this, he placed small twigs, then larger sticks. The flint and striker stone sat ready in his hands. He struck them together. Sparks flew and died. He adjusted the angle and tried again. More sparks. He struck a third time and a spark landed in the tinder. David bent close and blew gently. The spark glowed brighter. He blew again, coaxing it, feeding it air. Smoke rose. Then a tiny flame flickered to life. David carefully fed the flame with more tinder, then twigs, then sticks. Within minutes, a proper fire crackled before him. Heat pushed back the evening chill. Light drove away the darkness. Around the galaxy, viewers fell silent. On the screens, other contestants huddled in darkness or struggled with cold. Only the human had fire. In the Galactic Council chambers, Chief Arbitrator Venn watched with his crystalline eyes reflecting the firelight from the screen. He had suspected humans might have unusual skills, but this was faster than expected. Much faster. David sat by his fire and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 1 day down, 6 to go before the first real challenge. He pulled out the extra flint stones and began working on his next project. Using one stone as a hammer, he carefully chipped away at another, shaping it. Flakes fell away with each precise strike. The stone took form in his hands. Within an hour, David had created a hand axe. The edge was crude but sharp enough to cut wood and process materials. He tested it on a branch and smiled as it bit deep into the fiber. Across the planet, other contestants had finally found caves or hollow trees to huddle in for the night. They were cold, hungry, and frightened. They wondered if they could survive even 1 week. David banked his fire to keep it alive through the night, then crawled into his shelter. Tomorrow he would need to find food and make better tools. But tonight he was warm, safe, and dry. Tonight he was exactly where a human was meant to be. Above the planet, the camera drones recorded everything. The galaxy was beginning to understand that this competition might not end the way anyone expected. Dawn broke over Terran 7 with a chorus of unfamiliar bird calls. David woke to find his fire reduced to glowing embers. He fed it dry grass and twigs, bringing flames back to life. The warmth felt good against the morning chill. Around the galaxy, millions tuned in to watch the second day of the survival trial. Most expected the contestants to be moving slower now, worn down by a difficult first night. They were right about everyone except the human. David stretched and began his morning routine. First, he checked his shelter for any damage from the night. A few leaves had blown away, so he replaced them. Then he drank from the stream, the cold water shocking him fully awake. His stomach growled with hunger, but he had work to do before finding food. The hand axe from yesterday was useful but limited. He needed more tools, better tools. David gathered several straight branches and began processing them with the stone blade. He cut notches, stripped bark, and split wood along the grain. His hands moved with steady confidence. In the mountains, Tesser huddled against cold stone. Her nest had collapsed during the night, and she had spent the dark hours shivering. She was hungry, but had no idea which plants might be safe to eat. Her people had always received nutrition through processed supplements. Raw food was a concept she understood only academically. Ral had managed slightly better. The Aquarian had found shellfish clinging to rocks in the tidal pools. He pried them open and ate the flesh raw, grateful for anything to fill his stomach. But he had no fire to cook with, no way to preserve extra food. Every meal would have to be fresh, requiring constant energy to gather. Gorth refused to show weakness. The reptilian warrior tore into raw plants and forced himself to swallow them. Some made him sick. He vomited behind his cave and tried again with different vegetation. His pride would not let him quit, but his body was suffering. David worked on his most important project, a bow drill for making fire. He carved a straight stick for the drill itself, another for the bow, and a flat piece for the fireboard. He created cordage by twisting long grass fibers together, braiding them for strength. The work took hours, but David did not rush. Better to build it right the first time. Across the galaxy, experts began analyzing what they were seeing. Military strategists noted the human's methodical approach. Scientists compared his tool-making to archaeological records. Anthropologists pulled up old studies about human evolution. A picture emerged that made many species uncomfortable. Humans had evolved without any natural advantages. No claws, no armor, no venom, no energy manipulation, just clever minds and nimble hands. They had survived by making tools, controlling fire, and adapting to any environment. What seemed primitive was actually incredibly sophisticated. By midday, David had completed his bow drill. He carved a small notch in the fireboard and placed a ball of dry tinder next to it. The drill went into the notch, the bow wrapped around it. David held a stone with a depression on top to cap the drill. Then he began moving the bow back and forth. The drill spun rapidly, friction building heat. Smoke rose from the notch. David kept the rhythm steady, not too fast or too slow. More smoke poured out. A coal formed in the notch, hot and glowing. David carefully dumped it into the tinder and blew gently. Flames erupted. He had made fire from scratch, no flint needed. This method could work anywhere with wood and cordage. Ral had been watching the human's video feed between his own foraging attempts. He tried to copy the fire-making technique, gathering similar materials. But when he attempted the bow drill, the cordage broke. His hands, adapted for swimming, lacked the right grip strength. The drill kept slipping. After an hour of frustration, he gave up. David used his new fire to begin a smoking rack. He arranged green branches over the flames, creating a platform where smoke would rise through. Fish from the stream could be preserved this way, giving him food stores for later. He also heated the tip of a long, straight branch in the fire, hardening the wood until it was almost as tough as stone. This fire-hardened spear would be his first real weapon. Tesser made a discovery of her own. From her high vantage point, she spotted which fruits the native birds were eating. If the local animals could eat them safely, perhaps she could too. She glided down and collected several types of berries. Some tasted sweet, others bitter, but none made her sick. It was not much, but it was something. She watched the humans feed as well. His casual competence fascinated and frustrated her. Tesser had trained as a scholar, mastering complex mathematics and stellar navigation. But here, all that knowledge meant nothing. The human was succeeding with skills her people had never needed to develop. Gorth wanted to ignore the human, but his species' military command ordered him to observe and learn. He watched David create cordage and grudgingly tried to replicate it. His thick fingers struggled with the delicate work. The grass kept tearing. After a dozen attempts, he managed to create a weak rope that fell apart when he pulled on it. The warrior roared in frustration. He had commanded troops in battle, operated heavy weapons, piloted assault craft. Why could he not twist grass together properly? David spent the afternoon fishing. He used his spear to catch 3 large fish in the shallows, striking quickly when they swam near. He cleaned them using the sharp edge of flint, removing guts and scales. Some pieces went onto the smoking rack. The rest he cooked over the fire on a flat stone. The smell of cooking fish made his mouth water. This was the first hot meal any contestant had eaten since arriving on Terran 7. As he ate, David thought about the other contestants. He had watched some of their feeds during breaks. They were struggling, but not because they were stupid or weak. They simply had no frame of reference for this kind of survival. Their entire civilizations had built upward from technological foundations. They had never needed to build from nothing. Humans were different because Earth had given them no choice. Survive or die, learn or perish, adapt or go extinct. Every generation had passed down knowledge of fire, tools, shelter, and hunting. This knowledge was burned into human culture so deeply that it seemed instinctive. By evening, David had created an impressive array of tools: stone knives, wooden spears, cordage of various thicknesses, bone needles from fish skeletons, and a watertight basket woven from plant fibers. He had enough resources to face the first challenge with confidence. Other contestants had made some progress. Tessier had built a better nest. Ral had found a tide pool with more shellfish. Gorth had successfully started a fire by focusing his anger into determination, copying David's flint method through sheer stubborn repetition. But several contestants had already given up. A gelatinous being from a low-gravity world could not maintain solid form in Terran 7's heavier pull. A silicon-based contestant found the humid atmosphere corrosive. A crystalline delegate discovered that their body structure was too rigid for the kind of work required. Elimination beacons activated. Transport pods descended to collect those who had failed. The competition was already narrowing. David watched the pods rise back into the sky. He felt sympathy for those eliminated, but also understood that this trial was revealing an important truth. Technology had allowed many species to thrive, but it had also made them dependent. Without it, they were helpless. Humans had never lost their connection to primitive survival because Earth had been too harsh to allow it. Even in the modern age, people still went camping, still practiced wilderness skills, still taught their children how their ancestors had lived. That cultural memory was proving invaluable now. Chief Arbitrator Venn reviewed the day's recordings with growing interest. The human was not just surviving, he was thriving. More importantly, he was demonstrating techniques that other species were beginning to copy. Gorth had made fire. Tesser had learned to identify safe food. Ral was experimenting with cordage. They were learning from the human. That was unexpected but not forbidden by the rules. David banked his fire again and settled into his shelter. Tomorrow the first official challenge would be announced. He would need to be ready for anything. But tonight, with a full stomach and warm fire, he allowed himself to feel hope, not just for himself but for humanity. The galaxy was watching. The galaxy was learning, and perhaps, just perhaps, humans had something valuable to teach after all. Chief Arbitrator Venn appeared as a holographic projection above the forest clearing, where David had made camp, the crystalline being shimmered in the morning light, its form geometric and precise. Around the planet, similar projections appeared before each remaining contestant. The first official challenge was about to be, announced. David set down the spear. He had been sharpening and gave the hologram his full attention. Venn's voice resonated with harmonic tones that universal. Translators converted to each species' language. The challenge was simple in concept but difficult in execution. Each contestant must hunt and kill a boar-like creature native to Terran 7. They had 48 hours. Failure meant elimination. The hologram showed an image of the target animal. It stood about waist-high to David with thick bristled fur, curved tusks, and powerful legs. The creature was aggressive when threatened and strong enough to gore a contestant to death. David studied the image carefully, noting the muscle structure and likely behaviors. When the hologram faded, David immediately began tracking. He had seen boar droppings near the stream yesterday. Fresh tracks in the soft mud told him which direction the animals traveled. He followed the trail slowly, reading the signs. Here the boar had rooted in the ground for tubers. There it had rubbed against a tree, leaving bristles caught in the bark. In the mountains, Tesser looked at the projection in dismay. Her people did not hunt. They had never hunted. The sky dancers were vegetarian by culture and biology. She could fly, but her hollow bones would shatter if she struck something with force. Even if she could kill the boar, her body would reject the meat. She activated her emergency beacon. A transport pod would come for her. The trial was over. She had learned much but could not continue. Ral stood in the surf watching the hologram fade. Hunt a land animal. He was built for water, not chasing prey through forests. His legs were strong for swimming but awkward for running. His hands could grip but lacked claws or strength for killing. He had no weapons and no idea how to make them. The Aquarian sat on a rock and put his head in his hands. This challenge seemed designed to eliminate anyone who was not a natural predator. Gorth grinned with anticipation. Finally, a challenge that suited his talents. He was a warrior, bred for combat. His claws were sharp, his jaws powerful. He would run down a boar and kill it with his bare hands. No tricks, no tools, just raw strength. He charged into the forest, following his nose toward the scent of animals. Within an hour, he found a boar rooting near a fallen log. Gorth roared his battle cry and rushed forward. The boar looked up, assessed the threat, and charged back. They met with a bone-jarring impact. Gorth's claws raked the boar's hide but failed to penetrate the thick bristles and tough skin. The boar's tusks caught him in the thigh, tearing through his clothing and into flesh. Gorth howled in pain and stumbled backward. The boar pressed its advantage, slashing again. Gorth barely escaped, limping away while the boar snorted in victory and returned to its meal. The warrior collapsed against a tree, bleeding and humiliated. His strength had not been enough. Without weapons or armor, he was just another animal, and not a particularly effective one. David found a game trail that multiple boars used regularly. He studied the area, looking for the best ambush location. There, where the trail narrowed between two large trees, he began constructing a trap. Using his cordage and flexible branches, David built a snare designed to catch the boar's leg. But he did not rely on the snare alone. He also prepared a deadfall trap, a heavy log suspended above the trail that would fall when triggered. And finally, he positioned himself in a tree with his spear ready to finish what the trap started. This was how humans had always hunted, Not with overwhelming strength or speed, but with planning, patience, and tools. Hours passed. David waited motionlessly in the tree, breathing slowly, becoming part of the forest. Below, his trap sat ready and invisible. The sun moved across the sky, then he heard it. Heavy footsteps and the snuffling grunt of a boar. A large male came down the trail, completely unaware of the danger. It passed the first trigger point. David remained still. The boar reached the second trigger. Its front leg caught in the snare. The boar squealed and thrashed. The movement triggered the deadfall. The heavy log swung down and struck the boar's back with devastating force. The creature collapsed, stunned but still alive. David dropped from the tree and drove his spear into the boar's heart with a single clean thrust. The animal died quickly, without unnecessary suffering. David closed his eyes for a moment, honoring the life that would sustain his own. Then he began the work of field dressing. He used his flint knives to carefully open the body cavity, removing organs and draining blood. Every part would be used. The hide for leather, the bones for tools, the sinew for stronger cordage, the meat for food, even the organs for various purposes. This was not cruelty. This was survival with respect. Across the galaxy, viewers watched in silence. Many had never seen an animal killed for food. Their protein came from synthesizers or vat-grown cells. The raw reality of death disturbed them. But others, particularly those from older cultures, recognized the efficiency and respect in David's actions. He had not killed for sport or glory. He had killed because the challenge required it, and he had done so as humanely as possible. Ral had been watching David's feed while trying to build courage for his own hunt. When he saw the traps, the patience, the tools, something clicked in his mind. He did not need to be strong. He needed to be smart. The Aquarian began gathering materials. His hands, so skilled at working with water currents, proved capable of weaving reeds into a net. It took hours of work, but eventually he had a functional trap. He found a narrow ravine where boars traveled to reach water and strung his net across it. Then he waited, hidden in the rocks above. A young boar came down the ravine in the late afternoon. It ran straight into the net, tangling itself in the woven reeds. Ral dropped a heavy rock on the trapped animal, killing it quickly. It was not elegant, but it worked. The Aquarian stared at the dead boar for a long moment. He had hunted. He had killed. These were things his people had not done for thousands of generations. But he had learned from watching the human, and that knowledge had saved him from elimination. Gorth limped back to his cave, defeated and bleeding. He had failed the challenge. His pride had made him foolish. He had charged in like a warrior when he should have thought like a survivor. The realization burned worse than his wounds. He watched the humans feed, expecting to see gloating or arrogance. Instead, he saw David carefully processing the boar, wasting nothing, working with quiet efficiency. There was no celebration, no pride, just competent work. Gorth made a decision. He dragged himself back toward the forest, following the trail of boar tracks. This time he would not charge. This time he would observe. He found a boar feeding in a clearing and studied it for over an hour. He noted how it moved, where it was vulnerable, how it reacted to sounds. Then he began collecting stones, heavy and sharp-edged. He positioned them in a pile above a narrow defile where the boar would have to pass. When the animal came through, Gorth pushed the stones. They tumbled down, striking the boar and breaking its legs. The warrior descended and finished the job with a sharp rock to the skull. It was brutal and crude, but it worked. Gorth had hunted using tools and tactics instead of just strength. He had learned. By the end of the 48 hours, only 8 contestants remained. David had his boar, fully processed and preserving over his smoking rack. Ral had his kill, smaller but sufficient. Gorth had succeeded despite his injuries. 5 other contestants from various species had also completed the challenge, each finding their own methods. 10 had been eliminated. Tessir was gone by choice. Others had simply failed to adapt. Chief Arbitrator Ven appeared again before the survivors. His crystalline face was unreadable, but his tone carried a note of approval. The contestants had shown growth. They had learned. The next challenge would push them further. David listened to the announcement with calm attention. They would now have 3 days to construct a weapon capable of defeating a shielded combat drone. The shield would deflect simple strikes. Creativity and technique would be required. Around him, other contestants groaned or cursed in their various languages. David simply nodded. He had been expecting something like this. That night, as he tended his fire and planned his next weapon design, David thought about the other survivors. They were learning fast. Ral had proven himself adaptable. Gorth had overcome his pride. The others would also be growing stronger. Good. The trial was not meant to showcase human superiority. It was meant to reveal what all species could achieve when pushed beyond their comfortable limits. David added more wood to his fire and began sketching designs in the dirt with a stick. A bow, he thought. A strong bow with enough draw weight to punch through shields with repeated impacts. He had the materials and the knowledge. Now he just needed time. The galaxy watched and wondered what the next days would bring. A transport shuttle descended through the clouds and landed in a clearing at the center of Terran 7. For the first time since the trial began, all surviving contestants would gather in one location. David approached the meeting point cautiously, his best spear in hand. Trust was earned, not given, and he had no idea how the others might react to facing each other. 8 beings emerged from the forest, mountains, and coastline. David recognized them from watching the video feeds. Ral, the blue-skinned Aquarian. Gorth, the massive reptilian warrior still limping from his wounds. 5 others representing different species, each having survived through determination and learning. Chief Arbitrator Ven materialized in holographic form at the center of the clearing. Behind him, a large crate materialized as well. The crystalline being gestured to the container. Inside were 8 small spheres, each floating slightly above the ground. These were the combat drones, currently inactive. Ven explained that each drone possessed a basic energy shield designed to deflect simple kinetic impacts. The shield would stop anything below a certain force threshold. To defeat it, contestants would need weapons that could overwhelm the defense through power, repeated strikes, or clever design. They had 3 days to prepare. Then each would face their drone in single combat in an arena constructed nearby. Ven's hologram faded, leaving the 8 contestants alone together. Tension filled the air. Gorth growled low in his throat, eyeing the others as potential threats. A multi-limbed contestant named Drex skittered nervously, his 6 legs carrying him in anxious circles. An insectoid being called Skrit clicked her mandibles in what might have been greeting or warning. David lowered his spear and held up his empty hand in a peaceful gesture. "We are not enemies," he said clearly. "The trial tests us individually, but there is no rule against sharing knowledge." Gorth snorted. "Humans speak of cooperation when it benefits them. I need no help from others." "Your leg suggests otherwise," David replied without malice. "Pride is useful in battle, but fatal in survival." The warrior's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Ral stepped forward, his webbed feet squelching in the mud. "I would hear what the human suggests. I learned from watching his methods during the hunt. Perhaps we can all learn from each other." Over the next hour, an uneasy exchange began. David shared his understanding of the drone's shield technology. He had paid attention to Ven's explanation and drawn conclusions. The shield likely used energy to create a field that dissipated force across its surface. A single heavy impact would spread out and weaken, but concentrated force at one point or multiple rapid strikes might overload the system. Drex shared observations about the local woods, having explored different areas than David. Certain trees had denser wood, better for weapon construction. Skrit demonstrated how her species created adhesive from tree sap, useful for binding components. Even Gorth grudgingly contributed, explaining how his people had once used stone tools before technology, though those days were thousands of generations past. They dispersed to their separate camps, each with new ideas. But David noticed Ral lingering behind. "Human," the Aquarian said quietly. "I wish to learn more from you. What would you trade for teaching?" David considered. "What can you offer?" Ral gestured toward the coast. "My people understand water and flexibility. There are plants in the tidal pools that have qualities you might find useful. Fibers that do not rot. Resins that harden like stone when dried. I can show you." "Deal," David agreed. Come to my camp tomorrow morning." That night, David worked by firelight on his primary weapon design. A bow was still his best option, but it needed to be exceptionally powerful. He selected a long piece of the dense wood Drex had mentioned and began carefully shaping it. The curve had to be precise, the limbs balanced perfectly. Too stiff and it would break. Too flexible and it would lack power. He carved a handle grip in the center and notches at each end for the string. Then came the critical step, heat treating the wood. David built up his fire until it was very hot, then carefully held each limb of the bow near the flames, slowly heating the wood. The heat changed the wood's internal structure, making it more elastic and powerful without becoming brittle. This was knowledge passed down through human history. Ancient bowyers had discovered these techniques through generations of experimentation. While the bow cooled, David worked on arrows. These needed to be straight, balanced, and tipped with the sharpest stone points he could create. He made 3 types: heavy arrows for maximum impact, fire-hardened splitting arrows that might penetrate better, and experimental arrows with wider heads designed to create more pressure against a single point of the shield. Across the planet, other contestants struggled with their designs. Gorth tried to create a massive club but could not properly balance it. The weapon was so heavy he could barely swing it, and so clumsy it would be easy to dodge. He roared in frustration and smashed it against a rock. Drex wove a net from tough fibers, thinking he might entangle the drone, but his test swings revealed the net was too slow and clumsy. The drone would simply fly away. Skrit attempted to create a blade using obsidian shards bound to a handle, but her mandibles and limbs were not designed for the kind of strikes needed. She could not generate enough force. The next morning, Ral arrived at David's camp carrying bundles of strange seaweed and other coastal materials. True to his word, he showed David several useful plants. One produced fibers that remained strong even when wet. Another created a resin that hardened into something nearly as tough as stone when exposed to air. In exchange, David taught Ral about leverage and weight distribution in weapons. He showed how a spear balanced at the right point could be thrown much farther and harder. He explained about following through on strikes to transfer maximum energy. Ral absorbed the information eagerly. His people were intelligent and adaptable. They had simply never needed these specific skills before. "Why do humans know these things?" Ral asked as they worked. "Your people have advanced technology too. Why maintain such ancient knowledge?" David smiled. "Because humans almost went extinct several times in our history. Ice ages, volcanic winters, climate shifts. We survived by remembering. Every generation taught the next how to live with nothing. Even now, with all our technology, we still practice these skills. We call it camping or survival training or historical reenactment. But really, we are keeping the memories alive." "Memories of hardship," Ral said thoughtfully. "Memories of survival," David corrected. "Hardship teaches. Comfort makes you forget." Using the coastal resins and fibers, David improved his bow. The string, made from the waterproof plant fibers, was stronger than his grass cordage. The resin reinforced the limbs at stress points. When he tested the weapon, the power was impressive. The arrow flew fast and true, punching deep into a tree trunk. Ral created his own weapon with David's guidance, a balanced throwing spear with a stone head affixed using the coastal adhesive. It would not be as powerful as David's bow, but it gave him a chance. On the second day, Gorth appeared at David's camp. The warrior said nothing at first, just stood at the edge of the clearing. David looked up from his work and waited. "I would learn," Gorth finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. "My people were warriors before we had technology. But that was so long ago, none remember how. Our weapons come from factories, our tactics from computer simulations. I am strong, but strength alone is not enough." David respected the admission. Pride was hard to swallow. "Sit," he said. "Let me see your wounds first." He used clean water and herbs to wash Gorth's gored leg, then bound it with strips of boar hide. The warrior endured the treatment stoically. Then David taught him about weight and momentum. A weapon did not need to be enormous to be effective. It needed to be fast and focused. He showed Gorth how to create a shorter, heavier club that could be swung with control. He demonstrated striking techniques that used the whole body's rotation, not just arm strength. Gorth practiced the movements, his natural coordination and strength becoming more effective with proper technique. He would never master these skills in 3 days, but he would be better than before. That evening, the three of them shared a meal by David's fire. Roasted fish, wild tubers Ral had identified as edible, and preserved boar meat. They talked about their worlds, their peoples, and what this trial meant. "My civilization sees this competition as a test of worthiness," Ral said. "But I think it reveals something else. We became so dependent on technology that we forgot how to exist without it." "My people believed strength was everything," Gorth added. "But I have learned there are different kinds of strength." David poked at the fire with a stick. "Humans had no choice but to learn these skills. Earth gave us no natural advantages. No crystal formations for energy. No natural weapons or armor. Just clever hands and stubborn minds. We had to invent everything or die. And now that experience saves you," Ral observed. "Maybe it saves all of us," David replied, "if we are willing to learn." The third day arrived. David made final adjustments to his bow and arrows. He tested each arrow for balance and straightness. He practiced drawing and releasing until the motion was smooth and automatic. The weapon was ready. More importantly, he was ready. Other contestants made their own preparations. Ral polished his spear point until it gleamed. Gorth practiced his swing patterns until muscle memory took over. Drex, Skrit, and the others worked on their various weapons and strategies. As the sun set, Chief Arbitrator Ven appeared again to announce that the arena trials would begin at dawn. 8 would compete, fewer would advance. David lay in his shelter that night listening to the forest sounds. Tomorrow would reveal whether his preparations were sufficient. But regardless of the outcome, something important had already happened. Strangers from different worlds had chosen cooperation over pure competition. They had learned from each other. In a way, that was its own victory. The galaxy would see what came next. The arena had grown overnight. Massive stone walls rose from the earth, shaped by Galactic Council technology that seemed almost magical. Tiered seating surrounded a flat combat floor made of packed earth and sand. Holographic screens floated above the arena, ensuring that every being across the galaxy could watch the trials clearly. Billions tuned in, eager to see which contestants would advance. David stood in a waiting area beneath the arena, along with the 7 other surviving contestants. The air was thick with nervous tension. Somewhere above, crowds that existed only as holographic observers filled the seats, their cheers and conversations creating a strange ambient noise. Chief Arbitrator Ven's crystalline form appeared before them. "The rules are simple," his harmonic voice announced. "Each contestant will face 1 combat drone. Defeat it within the time limit to advance. Failure means elimination. The order has been randomly selected." A holographic list appeared showing the sequence. Drex would go first, Skrit second, then others David did not know well. Ral would go 6th, Gorth 7th. David would be last. Drex's 6 legs trembled as he was led to the arena entrance. The multi-limbed contestant carried a web of woven fibers, his best attempt at a weapon. David wished him luck, and Drex clicked a response in his native language that the translator rendered as, "May survival favor the adaptable." The gate opened. Drex skittered onto the sandy floor. Across from him, a combat drone activated, rising to hover at chest height. It was a sphere about the size of a large melon, with a shimmering field around it indicating the active shield. The drone had no weapons beyond a stunning field, but that was enough. Its job was to defend itself, not kill. A horn sounded. The trial began. Drex charged forward, attempting to throw his fiber net over the drone. The sphere simply rose higher, easily evading the clumsy throw. Drex tried again, leaping with several limbs extended. The drone dodged. Again and again, Drex lunged while the drone danced away effortlessly. Time ran out. Drex had never even touched the shield. He was eliminated. The crowd's reaction was muted. This was expected. Most contestants had struggled throughout the trial. The real question was whether anyone could actually defeat the drones. Skrit fared slightly better. Her blade of obsidian shards managed to strike the shield once, but the impact merely bounced off. She attacked from different angles, trying to find a weakness, but the shield was omnidirectional. Her mandibles clicked in frustration as time expired. 2 more contestants failed in similar fashion. Their weapons hit the shields but could not penetrate. The crowd began to wonder if the challenge was even possible. Then came contestant number 5, a being named Floor from a gelatinous species. Floor had no solid weapons but had developed a strange strategy. The gelatinous form wrapped around the drone, attempting to smother it or find gaps in the shield. For a moment it seemed to work. The drone's movement became sluggish, but the shield's energy field disrupted Floor's cellular cohesion. The gelatinous form began to break apart, losing integrity. Floor released the drone and retreated, but the damage was done. Elimination. Raoul walked onto the arena floor with his balanced spear held ready. David watched intently from below. The Aquarian had worked hard and learned fast. He deserved success. The horn sounded. Raoul did not charge blindly. He circled the drone, watching its movement patterns. Then he threw his spear with all his strength. The stone point struck the shield and bounced away. Raoul retrieved the spear and tried again. And again. On the 7th throw, something changed. The shield flickered slightly where the spear had struck repeatedly in nearly the same spot. Raoul noticed. He adjusted his aim and threw again, targeting that exact location. The flicker became more pronounced. The shield was weakening under concentrated, repeated impacts, but time was running out. Raoul threw his spear one final time with desperate strength. The point penetrated. Not deeply, but enough to crack the shield. The drone wobbled, its defenses compromised. The horn sounded. Time had expired, but the judges conferred. Finally, Venn announced the decision. Raoul had damaged the shield significantly and demonstrated understanding of its weakness. He would advance. The Aquarian stumbled from the arena, exhausted but triumphant. David gripped his shoulder as he passed. Well done. Gorth entered next, carrying his newly designed club. The weapon was smaller than his first attempt, but much better balanced. The warrior's leg still bothered him, but he moved with determined purpose. The drone activated. Gorth roared and attacked, not with blind rage, but with the technique David had taught him. He used his whole body to generate power, swinging the club in controlled arcs. The first strike hit the shield hard. The second landed in nearly the same place. The third, fourth, fifth. The shield began to glow brightly under the assault. Gorth pressed his advantage, ignoring the pain in his wounded leg. His strikes were not elegant, but they were effective. The concentrated force was overwhelming the shield's ability to disperse energy. Cracks appeared in the energy field. Gorth swung one final time with all his remaining strength. The shield shattered. The club struck the drone directly, sending it tumbling across the sand, disabled. Victory. The crowd erupted in genuine surprise. A contestant had actually defeated a drone through pure determined assault. Gorth limped from the arena, breathing hard but holding his head high. He had proven himself. Now only David remained. He climbed the ramp into the arena, bow in one hand and quiver of arrows on his back. The evening sun cast long shadows across the sand. The holographic observers fell silent, curious to see what the human would do. David had watched all the previous attempts carefully. He understood the shield's limitations now. It could disperse force across its surface, but repeated impacts at the same location caused cumulative stress. The shield needed time to redistribute and stabilize between hits. If he could strike faster than the shield could recover, he could break through. His bow was perfect for this task. The drone activated, hovering at the center of the arena. David knocked an arrow but did not immediately shoot. He walked slowly to one side, observing the drone's tracking behavior. It rotated to face him, maintaining distance. Good. It had predictable responses. David stopped at a comfortable range about 20 meters away. He drew the bow smoothly, feeling the tension in the dense wood limbs. The draw weight was substantial, requiring real strength to pull back fully. He aimed and released. The arrow struck the shield dead center and bounced away. The shield glowed briefly where the impact occurred. David had already knocked another arrow. He drew and released in one smooth motion. The second arrow hit within a finger's width of the first. The shield flickered. Third arrow, fourth, fifth. David's movements were mechanical, precise, repetitive. Draw, aim at the same spot, release. Draw, aim, release. Each arrow struck within a small circle on the shield's surface. The concentrated bombardment gave the shield no time to fully recover between impacts. The glow intensified. Cracks appeared in the energy field. David switched to his heavier arrows designed for maximum impact. These flew slower but hit harder. The first heavy arrow struck the weakened point and penetrated slightly before the shield repelled it. The second heavy arrow broke through entirely. The shield collapsed with a flash of dissipating energy. The arrow punched into the drone's outer casing, damaging internal systems. The drone attempted to flee, but David was already releasing another arrow. This one struck the now unshielded sphere perfectly, and the drone fell from the air, landing in the sand with electronic systems sparking and dying. Total time, less than 2 minutes. The arena fell completely silent. Then the crowd exploded with noise. Cheering, arguments, disbelief, celebration. The human had not just defeated the drone. He had made it look almost easy. David lowered his bow and retrieved his arrows from where they had fallen. Waste not. He walked calmly from the arena, ignoring the holographic chaos around him. Below, Ral and Gorth waited. The Aquarian was grinning. That was impressive. Gorth nodded slowly. I understand now why humans survived their harsh world. You think many steps ahead. I watched you both and learned from your attempts, David replied honestly. This was not individual success. We all contributed to understanding how to defeat the shields. Chief Arbitrator Ven appeared before the 3 surviving contestants. You have demonstrated growth, adaptability, and skill. The final trial awaits. In 3 days, you will be transported to the volcanic Badlands in the southern continent. There you must survive together for 7 days. Note the word together. This is no longer an individual test. Either all 3 succeed or all 3 fail. The 3 contestants looked at each other with new understanding. The trial had changed from competition to cooperation. They would need to rely on each other completely. Ven continued. The Badlands are the most hostile environment on Terran 7. Extreme temperatures, toxic gases, dangerous predators, limited water and food. Most trained survival experts would struggle there even with full equipment. You will have only what you carry and what you can make. The crystalline being's form shimmered. Prepare well. Your species' futures depend on your success. As Ven faded, the 3 contestants stood in the empty arena beneath the fading sky. A human, an Aquarian, and a reptilian warrior. Weeks ago they had been strangers from different worlds. Now their survival depended on unity. David broke the silence. We should plan together. Pool our knowledge and resources. What we learned individually must now become shared wisdom. Ral nodded. Agreed. I know methods for finding water in unlikely places. My people adapted to survive in environments with scarce resources. Gorth growled, but it was not aggressive. I know tracking and predator behavior, and I'm strong enough to carry heavy loads. Then we have a chance, David said. We have 3 days to prepare. Let us use them wisely. The galaxy watched as 3 beings from 3 worlds began planning together, united by necessity and growing respect. The final trial would test everything they had learned. But for the first time, none of them would face it alone. Heat shimmered across the volcanic Badlands like liquid glass. The transport pods descended through sulfurous clouds and landed on black rock that radiated warmth even in the early morning. David, Ral, and Gorth stepped out into the most hostile environment any of them had ever faced. The landscape was brutal and alien. Rivers of cooled lava created jagged fields that could shred feet and hands. Vents in the ground released toxic gases that burned lungs and stung eyes. The sun reflected off black stone with blinding intensity. In the distance, an active volcano sent plumes of ash into the sky. This was where they would spend the next 7 days together. David immediately began assessing their situation. First priority is shelter from the heat and gases. Second is water. Third is food. We stay together and make decisions as a group. Ral's blue skin was already showing signs of dehydration in the dry heat. I spotted a lava tube from the air during descent. Northeast, perhaps a kilometer. It could provide shelter. I will scout for predators and water, Gorth offered. His reptilian biology handled heat better than the others, and his wounds from the boar encounter had mostly healed. Good, David agreed. But no one goes far alone. We move as a team until we establish a secure camp. They picked their way carefully across the obsidian fields. The volcanic glass was sharper than any knife, and one wrong step could cause serious injury. David had made crude wrappings for their feet from boar hide during the preparation days, but even these were being shredded by the terrain. The lava tube Ral had spotted was a blessing. The ancient tunnel, carved by flowing lava long ago, provided shade and protection from the worst of the heat. The temperature inside was still warm but bearable. More importantly, the rock walls blocked the toxic gases that occasionally drifted across the surface. "This will work," David said, examining the tunnel. "It is defensible, protected, and large enough for all of us." They spent the first day establishing their camp. David created fire using his bow drill method, though finding dry wood in the volcanic landscape was challenging. What little vegetation existed here was tough and moisture-starved. Gorth used his strength to move large rocks, creating barriers at the tunnel entrance that would slow any predator. Raoul made a crucial discovery while exploring deeper into the tunnel. Moisture condensed on certain sections of cooler rock where underground water was close to the surface. By hanging absorbent materials, they could collect small amounts of precious water. It was not much, but it was something. That night, they rationed what water they had brought and discussed strategy. The heat was the most immediate threat. They would need to move during the cooler hours of dawn and dusk, resting during the day when the sun turned the Badlands into an oven. On the second day, they began exploring outward from their tunnel shelter in careful sweeps. David found a patch of hardy succulents that stored moisture in thick leaves. He tested one cautiously, finding it bitter but drinkable. Gorth tracked a lizard-like creature to a hidden spring where water bubbled up from deep underground. The water was warm and mineral-heavy but safe to drink after boiling. Raoul discovered something equally important. Certain volcanic minerals, when mixed with water and left to evaporate in the sun, produced salt crystals. In this heat, maintaining salt balance was critical to survival. By the third day, they had established a routine. Wake before dawn, gather water and food, return to the tunnel during the worst heat, venture out again in the evening. They worked efficiently, each member contributing their unique skills. But the Badlands had one more test for them. On the fourth morning, as they prepared to make their daily water run, Gorth noticed something disturbing. His keen predator senses had picked up a trail. Something large had passed near their tunnel during the night. David examined the tracks. They were massive, with three-toed prints pressed deep into softer ash between the rock fields. "What kind of predator lives here?" "Big one," Gorth replied grimly. "And it knows we are here now." They proceeded with their water gathering, but tension rode with them. The Badlands had seemed empty of large life, but that had been an illusion. Something had adapted to thrive in this hellish landscape, and it was hunting them. That evening, the predator revealed itself. A massive reptilian creature, built like a dragon from human mythology, emerged from behind a lava flow. Its scales were the color of cooled lava, providing perfect camouflage. Heat shimmer rose from its body, molten eyes fixed on the three smaller beings. The creature was a volcanic apex predator, designed by evolution to survive and hunt in extreme heat. It was easily 4 times Gorth's size, with claws that could tear through rock and jaws that dripped with caustic saliva. "Back to the tunnel," David said quietly. Slowly. No sudden moves. They retreated carefully, but the predator followed. It was not attacking yet, just stalking, testing them. The tunnel entrance was still 50 meters away. The creature lunged forward suddenly, covering ground with frightening speed. Gorth roared a challenge and stepped forward, placing himself between the predator and his companions. His warrior instincts overrode survival sense. The creature swatted Gorth aside with one massive claw. The reptilian warrior flew through the air and crashed against rock, stunned but alive. The predator turned its attention to the more vulnerable targets. David grabbed his bow and fired an arrow. It struck the creature's scaled hide and bounced off harmlessly. Raoul threw a spear that suffered the same fate. This was not a drone with a shield they could overwhelm. This was living armor, refined by millions of years of evolution. "Run!" David shouted, but Raoul was already moving toward Gorth's fallen form. "I will not leave him," the Aquarian said firmly. David cursed and ran toward them both. The predator advanced, its movements deliberate now. It had cornered its prey. Then Gorth stirred. He shook his head, clearing the daze, and saw the situation. "Leave me," he growled. "Save yourselves." "No," David replied. "We survive together or not at all." An idea formed in David's mind. Individual attacks would not work, but what about the environment itself? He looked around frantically. There were vents releasing toxic gases, and there, a field of particularly sharp obsidian, and nearby unstable-looking rocks piled precariously. Raoul helped Gorth to the tunnel. "I will distract it." "That is suicide," Gorth protested. "That is tactics," David corrected. "Trust me." He ran toward the gas vent, making himself an obvious target. The predator took the bait, following him instead of the slower injured prey. David let it through the gas cloud. The creature snorted and hissed but pushed through, barely bothered by the fumes that would have killed a human in seconds. David ran across the obsidian field, his wrapped feet finding safe spots between the worst shards. The predator followed but moved more carefully, even its thick hide vulnerable to the sharp volcanic glass. That hesitation gave David the seconds he needed. He reached the unstable rock pile and grabbed a long stick he had spotted earlier. Using it as a lever, he pried at the keystone rock holding the pile in place. The predator was 10 meters away when the rocks gave way. Tons of stone tumbled down the slope directly into the creature's path. The predator tried to dodge but was not fast enough. Rocks struck its legs, causing it to stumble. More rocks buried it partially. The creature was not dead, but it was trapped and injured. It roared in fury, struggling against the weight pinning it down. David did not wait. He ran back to the tunnel where Raoul was helping Gorth inside. They collapsed together in the safety of the lava tube, breathing hard. "You risked your life for us," Gorth said quietly. "Why?" "Because that is what teams do," David replied. "We are stronger together." The next 3 days were easier. The trapped predator's roars drove away other threats. They focused on recovery and survival. Gorth's injuries were painful but not critical. Raoul's water collection method improved with practice. David crafted better tools from the volcanic materials. On the 7th morning, they stood together at the tunnel entrance, watching the sunrise over the Badlands. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and battered, but they were alive. All 3 of them. Chief Arbitrator Venn materialized in holographic form. "The trial is complete. You have succeeded." The 3 beings stood a bit straighter despite their exhaustion. Venn continued. "This competition was never just about survival skills. It was designed to reveal a critical weakness in galactic civilization. Most species have become so dependent on technology that they have forgotten the fundamentals of existence. You 3 represent different evolutionary paths, but you shared one thing: the willingness to learn." The crystalline being's form shimmered with what might have been approval. The human brought knowledge that others had lost. The Aquarian brought adaptability and intelligence. The warrior brought strength and determination. Alone, each of you might have failed. Together, you thrived. Venn gestured, and the volcanic landscape faded, replaced by a view of the Galactic Council chambers. "Your species will each receive representation on the High Command. But more importantly, you 3 will lead a new initiative, the Fundamental Skills Program. You will teach what you have learned here to species across the galaxy." David felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the rightness of it. "We accept. With honor," Raoul added. Gorth simply nodded, his eyes bright with new understanding. They were transported back to civilization, to medical care and rest. But they remained together, these 3 beings who had survived the Badlands. Over the following months, they became instructors, teaching primitive skills to species that had forgotten them. Classes filled with beings from 100 worlds, learning to make fire, create tools, find water, and build shelter. Military academies added survival training to their curricula. Scientists studied the techniques with new respect. Children across the galaxy learned skills their ancestors had abandoned generations ago. David stood before a class of mixed species one day, demonstrating fire starting with a bow drill. He looked out at the eager faces, representing so many different worlds and forms, all united by the desire to learn. "Technology is wonderful," he told them. "It lets us reach the stars, cure diseases, and connect across impossible distances. But technology is built on a foundation. If that foundation cracks, everything built on it collapses. Today you will learn how to exist with nothing but your hands and your mind. Not because we want to return to primitive times, but because true advancement means never forgetting where you came from." Raoul taught classes on adaptability and resource management. Gorth trained warriors in survival combat. Together they rebuilt what had been lost. Years later, David returned to Earth briefly. He visited his old wilderness school, now expanded and thriving. Students practiced archery and fire starting in the fields where he had once taught basic survival skills. One young student approached him. "Is it true you survived the Badlands on Terran 7? David smiled. "I had help. Good help from good beings who were willing to learn and work together." "What was the most important thing you learned?" the student asked. David thought about that question carefully. He remembered the heat of the Badlands, the challenge of the drone. the moment when Gorth had stepped between him and danger. He remembered Ral refusing to leave a fallen companion. "I learned that no species is superior or inferior," David finally replied. "We each have different strengths forged by different circumstances. Humanity survived Earth's harshness, and that gave us certain skills. But other species have their own gifts. True strength comes not from being the best at everything, but from knowing when to teach and when to learn. From understanding that cooperation creates something greater than any individual." The student nodded thoughtfully and returned to practicing fire, starting with a group that included young beings from 4 different worlds. David watched them work together, sharing techniques and encouragement. This was the real victory of Terran 7. Not that humanity had proven itself capable, but that the galaxy had remembered an essential truth. Advancement without foundation was fragile, but knowledge shared and skills maintained created something that could endure anything. David walked through the fields, past students building shelters and crafting tools. The sounds of learning filled the air. Somewhere in orbit, a galactic council ship waited to carry him back to his duties as High Command representative. But here in this moment, he was simply a teacher passing on knowledge to the next generation, just as countless humans had done before him, stretching back to the first person who had shown another how to make fire. The flame had been passed. It would not go out. Not as long as beings of any species were willing to remember that civilization was not just towers reaching toward the stars, but also hands shaping tools and minds solving problems. Technology could be lost or fail, but knowledge shared freely and practiced regularly could survive anything. David left Earth satisfied, knowing the work would continue. Behind him, students from across the galaxy learned skills that their ancestors would have considered essential, but that their current civilizations had forgotten. And in the Galactic Council chambers, representatives from hundreds of worlds now understood that the path forward sometimes required remembering the path behind. The trial on Terran 7 was over, but the lesson would echo through the ages.